Those of you who do not know me, my name is Katie. I am with the Worcester Area Chamber of Commerce. Thank you very much for joining us today. I do want to give a couple of key points for today's presentation. It will be recorded and hosted on our website and on our YouTube page. So if you need to go back and refer to anything, the presentation or the recording, you can do that afterwards. And then without further ado, I am just going to briefly introduce our speaker, Chuck Bisacki. Chuck is a 21-year resident of Wayne County. His wife, Patty, and him have adopted 5 children of Columbia, and they enjoy their hobby farm outside of Shreve. He is a business executive who has traveled the world, but now has chosen to enjoy and contribute to Wayne County full-time, which we appreciate. He is spearheading a project to restore Shreve with a new nonprofit, Community Development Corp. And he has found a practical way of contributing to our region through his new coaching business, Enlightened Business Coaching, which started in November of 2020. So without further ado, I want to leave plenty of time for Chuck and any questions we may have. So Chuck, go ahead and take it away.
Well, great. Good morning, everybody. Want to make sure that you can see my screen and see the presentation. If anybody has a problem, please just let me know. So your time is valuable, and using this time effectively is really important. So I thank you for joining us, for leveraging time. And you can't create more time, so all you can do is use it better. So the main purpose that we're looking for to leverage our time is so that we can work on our business versus in our business. So let me give you a little bit of background about me. So I have been working on improving businesses for over 30 years, and that is my passion. And I've done it from various roles, either as an owner, as a CEO, in operations, but it's primarily been to be a change agent. And so I am skilled at being able to kind of turn the knobs and tune things in and get a business to flow and work. I've done it in family businesses, corporate environments, and even international businesses. So from a family business standpoint, business I was part of where we implemented some things that actually in 1995, we were on national television on the evening news because of the way we implemented things. And that was pretty cool and a great experience. From a corporate standpoint, I've worked at major places. I was working at GE last year at their aircraft engine plant in Boston. And then from an international standpoint, started up a business in China with a partner. And we built a culture that was suited for the US in that business, which was a real challenge, but it was really neat to experience. And finally helped that partner transition their business from one generation to another, and they were located in Sweden. So in many ways, I've been a lifetime coach. And that is something I realized as I wanted to settle in the area. And I felt that the best value I could bring to this community was actually using that experience and the approach that I use, which is low key, trying to meet people right where they're at as a business coach. And I'll explain that a little bit, why that's important. But it's really important to the community and our success going forward. And so I'm running that business out of our coffee house. My wife and I had a crazy idea 3 years ago to start a coffee house, and lo and behold, it becomes a great place to run a coaching business out of. So if you've not been down there, we've won Best of the Best last few years and our first 2 years in existence. And so that's actually where I'm seated right now. So I really appreciate you participating today. Our target is 1 hour. I think we will be within that. Most important is participation. Feel free to unmute to talk or enter a chat, and Katie will connect you. But right now, if you have your phone and it's a iPhone or even a Android phone with a QR reader, you could actually scan on the screen the QR code, and you should get my contact information so that we can connect in the future if you have a need. I'll just give you a second for that. Okay, I'll bring that information up again later, and you'll be able to get it again. So a little bit about Action Coach. We are the world's #1 business coaching firm, and we have 1,000 offices in 70 countries worldwide. We're privately owned and founded by Brad Sugars, who is from Australia, and that's one of the reasons that you may not have heard of Action Coach. But it is growing rapidly, and even in the age of the coronavirus, we had a banner year last year because what you find out is businesses need people to help them. They are in a position as a private business owner of a pretty lonely place. And so our vision is to provide world abundance through business re-education. And how do I bring that home? Well, I live here in Shreve, and we've got a half dozen businesses that are really vital to the community. These businesses, in some cases, have thrived for years. In other cases, they've struggled. But the health of this community is heavily dependent on how those businesses do. Everybody knows their business, but they don't know how to do business at times, and they don't know how to pass it on to the next generation. And that ends up being empty storefronts if it's not done right. So that's part of my passion. And we're coaching over 15,000 businesses each week, and just how we are on the map. And what's really exciting about this is there's not a business that we haven't coached, and the network of the coaches is fantastic. So I can contact anybody anywhere in the world, and as part of our culture, it's to help each other. And so we are there for each other, and it's a pretty amazing environment. But that's not what you're here for. You're here to use your time better. So first thing I'm going to do is ask you to take this little survey here and rate yourself. And so it ranges for how you use time. And the highest rating is a 5, and I have a plan and execute my plan daily and achieve my goals is a 5. And a 1 at the other end of the spectrum is I feel I'm out of control and hopelessly behind. So read through those for a second, and then just quickly give yourself a rating and write it down. So I said participation is important. So for you to be engaged in this process, you've got to participate. So I would ask that some of you share what you rated yourself and why. If you would like, you could also just shoot it into the chat, and Katie can read off a couple, but would love to hear from you.
Hi, Chuck. I can share.
Thanks, Stacy.
So I would say I'm somewhere between a 2 and a 3. I feel like I usually do have a plan and I can accomplish some of that plan, but yet at the same time, I am in human resources, so there's a lot of reaction to things that pop up unexpectedly. So I kind of feel like I'm always on that hamster wheel of I never get enough done.
Okay, great. Great. And you're right about different roles will have different levels of activities that are flow through or current day activities. So, and that's got to be planned for in ways, but in other ways you can't predict it. Somebody else want to share? Well, that is fine. What I do encourage you to do is remember that number, and let's come back to it at the end, and let's look at that again in the future when you look at opportunities to use it. So, we're going to talk a little bit about what to expect today. And the first thing is expect to have some BFOs. And anybody heard of that term before? A BFO? I know a slightly different one from previous days, but a BFO is a blinding flash of the obvious. These are those aha moments where you get a little nugget of information that really helps you. And a light bulb goes off in your mind, or you're enlightened, and you really need to write those down. Take the time, write that down. Because from my experience of years and years of going to seminars or trainings, you invest that time. If you come out with one good idea, it's the leverage you need to be able to benefit from that time that you invested. So look for BFOs. May ask you if you've got any at the end of our training, and just encourage you to take some notes. So please do that. So here's a desire that I have, that you protect yourself as we go through this training. There's a term called I know. And I know is something that becomes a blocker, because once you say the word I know, your attention span is gone. And so don't let yourself mentally say I know. When you hear something you've heard before, try to stay engaged, and in your own mind say, isn't that interesting? And you can just see in saying that you leave space for learning. And so please try to avoid in your own mind saying I know. And I've done that. I've sat in seminars where I'll say, oh, I know this part, and I will clock out, and I will miss something that really could have brought me value, and I'll find out about it from somebody else later. So when something happens to us, we have a choice, and we can either have blame, excuses, or denial, which we'll talk about being below the point of power, or we can take ownership, accountability, and responsibility for the outcome. Now, it's really important how we view that, because if we take the below the point of power, we are powerless, and we have the victim mentality. And if we are above the point of power, we find solutions, and we have victory. So what does that have to do with time management? Well, how are you viewing going through this time here together? Are you looking at this as I'm going to take ownership, accountability, and responsibility for my time, or it's hopeless, I'm going to have interruptions, and I'm not going to be able to get my work done? So it's really important to be above the point of power. And so as we go through, just try to lean into that and be on that side. So another key point, and just because you are here, that means you understand this. If you're not growing, you're dying. It's that simple. And so that's the same way for your business. Your business, if it's not growing, it's dying. And so we have to continually be putting energy into it for it to grow. And the fact that you're sitting here trying to improve is a sign that you understand the second law of thermodynamics, which is things go from order to disorder. And so thank you for being here, and you are taking the steps to working on healthy growth. So one more concept before we get into our time management material. And this is the concept of leverage, which is in the name of this seminar. And the first concept of leverage is doing more with less. So you can do more in less time if you understand the concept of leverage. You will see examples of that as we go through. And if you learn how to do something once and get the ongoing benefit, it has the same effect. So what does education do? If you learn how to do something better, you learned it once, you invested the time once, and then you're able to go forward and use that over and over again. If somebody writes a book, they get royalties from that book forever and ever. If somebody makes a book, every time you make the book, you have to physically make it and sell it, and therefore it doesn't have as much leverage in it. But the writer of the book has got a great leverage point. So any questions about that concept of leverage? So we're going to talk about leverage further as we go through our time here. So an important concept that we use in Action Coach is the concept of what a successful business is. And it's a commercial, profitable enterprise that works without you. So what does that mean to a business owner or a business manager? Well, it means that it's a robust system that is effective and not dependent on you to be in the operation. Why is that important? Well, for business owners, it really is important because they'll become, in many ways, slaves to the business at times. For managers, they'll have the same effect. They won't be able to go on vacation. They won't be able to get time away from their department to work on the things that are really important. But also, when you're looking at business valuations, businesses are valued much more if the owner doesn't have to work in the business. It's a five-fold increase in value because people who want to buy that business, they don't need to run it. They can see it as an investment. So it's a key part of our model. And it's not just for the purpose of what people are going to do with the business. It sets the proper bar for how to run and improve a business. And so we have the 6 steps to finishing your business. And we're going to just go over this very briefly because it shows you why it's so important to get mastery at the very first level. And that is our first step is we help business owners, we help businesses eliminate chaos. And once we do that, we help them find their niche so that they can have predictable cash flow. And then we leverage that to get efficiency in the operation, build the team, and then provide leadership so that a business owner can finish the business and then either get a passive income or work on another project and move on from that business. Any of those are possibilities. And this isn't out of order for a manager. A manager can view many of these things the same way as they look in their area functions on how to finish their department or finish their area. But we're going to focus on just the first step of this process today. And the real powerful thing about this is if you do a good job in finishing your business or finishing your area of expertise, the results are massive. You get both time, money, and you get buy-in. But as I said, we're just going to focus today on the mastery stage and a couple elements of that. The very first piece that we're going to talk about, it only for a minute because it's really not what we're dealing with today. We're talking about time usage, but destination mastery is you have to begin with the end in mind. Now, you can be extremely efficient in the use of your time. You can, if say we're taking a drive on the road, we can miss every light, we can not have traffic, and that's all for naught if we're going in the wrong direction, right? So we need to make sure we've got the right destination, or even if we're efficient with the use of our time, it's going to be very efficient when we have to turn around and go in another direction. So the other area of mastery is time mastery, and that's what we're going to talk about the rest of our seminar here. So there's 3 main areas for time mastery. There's self-mastery, planning mastery, and delegation mastery. We will cover self-mastery and planning mastery today. Delegation mastery is something that if people have interest, I can help them with that. But today we're going to stick to self-mastery and planning mastery. So what is self-mastery? You got to realize your most valuable asset is time. How you invest your time is one of the keys to business success. So there is a principle called the Pareto Principle. And there will always be too much to do. I've never done anything where there wasn't too much to do. Although maybe last March when we were sitting at home, some people were sitting at home. And I was actually still working in Boston and being thrown out of every hotel because they were closing. But I guess last year we had some people who didn't have things to do. But there will be normally always too much to do. And we can only focus on the most important items to have the highest impact. And that tends to be the first 20% of the things that we need to do, rather than the trivial many. And there was a mathematician and economist named Vilfredo Pareto, and he's Italian. And he developed this concept that's applied into quality systems, in statistical analysis, and it really works out to be true, is that if you focus on the 20% of the things you need to do that are most important, you will get 80% of the results. And so if you have that focus and can identify those things, that is a leverage in itself. You're focused on the right things and you'll make the biggest difference. Another way to express that is with a time target. And our time target, if you hit the outer side of it, you're focused on not urgent and not important tasks, and we call that a distraction. Then we have the urgent but not important, which you think about that, that's just delusionary. But we all fall into those activities. And then we have the urgent important activities that we need to do. And you know what this is? That's real demand. Those are, real people we're trying to serve. And that is the working in the business that I keep referring to. But the red center of the target is the not urgent but important zone. And this is where you're working on your business or working on your functional area. And that 20% of your time is the most valuable time. And another way of showing this and giving some of the fleshing this out goes back to an author named Stephen Covey. Have you all heard of Stephen Covey? So he did a lot of writing in the 80s and 90s around leadership and also time utilization and the relationship with those. And so he created this matrix, and this matrix looks at the types of activities in the different quadrants. And when you look at each of these quadrants, you get a little bit more of what those different rings were around the target. For instance, quadrant 1, which is important and urgent things. These are crises, process problems, customers, deadline-driven projects. Important and necessary, right? The important but not urgent activities are where we really talk about quality time. This is the zone that we were talking about. This is where we're working on prevention activities to prevent problems from happening, our planning activities, the things that will make a difference for the future of our business. And then the not important and urgent is the distraction area. These are interruptions, some calls, some mail, some email, some meetings, just a category of things that are not important, but they seem urgent because of the little devices that we always have. And it's funny because as we're sitting here, out of the corner of my eye, I see a text message flash up on my screen. Well, the error that I made is I should have turned that device off. So I just turned it over. I did silence it. But that is a perfect timing to show you exactly what happens to all of us. And that really kills productivity. time wasting. Just trivial, busy work, some mail, some phone calls. These are what we call time wasters. Some of them might even be pleasant activities, and they may fall into the quality time segment if handled properly, but at the same time, they can be time wasters. So we want to focus on that quality time. And the question for you is, are you in that zone ever? And if you're in that zone, how does it feel when you are there? So I'd like to get some feedback on that. Anybody understand that when they're working on the things that are really important, but they're not urgent, and you're carving out that time, how do you feel when you're doing that?
I think the first word that comes to mind is energized.
Yep. You feel like you're making progress up the mountain. You really feel like you're attaining something. Anybody else?
I feel like inspired.
What was that, Stacy?
I say like inspired.
Inspired. Yep. Others? Well, it normally is a good feeling. And the question is why are we not able to spend more time in that quadrant? And that brings us to where and why you leak time. So we're going to talk about this, and that would be some of those quadrant 3 and quadrant 4 items. Time wasters. Now, I will continue to say some positions require this, but there's still ways to do these different categories without it wasting our time. But constantly checking emails. It's important to set specific times to do it and not to monitor. You need to manage expectations in terms of responses too, especially within a business. Some people will send an email across the room and want an answer about something for the next hour. And we actually had an email etiquette at the last business I was running, because that's not the way you get that answer. You actually talk to the person, or you carry a note over and you do a conventional way to get that answer. So people would send something late in the day that needed to be done, and they weren't guaranteed they'd get that done. Another element of that is to cut down on the volume. We all get something like an average of 120 emails per day. And like a quarter of those at most are really needed emails. Some of it is need to know, but when you're getting 120, it looks like clutter. And so one thing that people do often is they'll CC people on emails. And again, if you have an email policy and you set some criteria about when a CC is done, it certainly shouldn't be done to just try to make sure somebody's boss knows that you've sent them an email. And also, it's not just to cover yourself. People need to make sure that CCs are done properly so it doesn't just all clutter together and you lose really valuable emails that you need. Another thing is actually to use some junk filters, ones that you put in place or that you actually direct emails to. Continually a challenge in the over information age that we live in. And so I have multiple emails and I use those email addresses for different purposes. Keeping digital devices out of key times. When you're in that 20%, you certainly don't want to have digital devices interrupting that 20% because it's been hard enough to get to that important time. There's a concept of putting our phones away or putting them on silence, and the younger generations don't necessarily understand that. And I'm fortunate that in my coffee house that I really don't have a problem with my employees having their phones, and because some of them are communicating on our behalf, and yet, customers sometimes don't get served as quick as they should because somebody is doing a text. And, but when people are at a focused job, use of cell phones really needs to be managed. Well, the next one is postponing hard yet important tasks. Now, how does this waste our time? Well, how many times do we have to keep doing things in an inefficient way when we know an efficient way and we just haven't gotten the time to do it? That's a real time waster for us. Saying yes to everyone. You can't say yes to everyone. You are not guilty of not being a servant leader if you're not saying yes to everyone. It is important you're making sure your team needs are being legitimately met, but they don't need to be by you. And if they are by you, then you need to do some additional work in understanding what needs to be delegated. And then the final one we're showing here, time waster, can be perfectionism. You got to use the Pareto Principle here. Because not everything needs to be done in a way that meets your highest standard and is effective. What we need to do is we need to do things that meet the requirements of the situation and try not to overdo them. And so I'm guilty of this at times, and my wife says I'm guilty of this, so I definitely am guilty of it. So perfectionism can get in the way and it can be a time waster. So we need to use that Pareto Principle is when do we apply that? Because it can also be a leverage. It can be something, if done well, will break through and get results. And then there's time vampires. Hey, if you got a minute, you'll hear that and people will pop into your office. And if you've got a culture that happens a lot, you won't get anything done. And then there's those who will schedule a meeting for everything. And so, but they'll go into the meeting and then nobody will be prepared. And you won't even know what the agenda is. You'll see later, we don't believe in having any meetings without an agenda. And then there's Mr. Trivial. So they'll bring anything into your office or to you because either they're nervous about doing it without your permission, which may be something you've got to manage through, or they're just that way. And you need to set expectations about what they should be coming in for and what they shouldn't. And it's an area of training. Let's go back to that point of power. If we get frustrated around these things, do we take ownership for it? Or do we just say, oh, this is hopeless. I'm not going to be able to get this done and I'm a victim. So coming back to that principle, it's your responsibility to manage your time. And then you have the person who's got the emotional crisis. And I'm sure an HR manager will see this a lot. And there's an element of this that you need to live with, but there's also a need to be proactive in how you use that time. And so at the very bottom here, you see it says time vampires only succeed if you allow them to do it. It is your fault if you buy into them. So it's coming back to that point of power and taking responsibility. So tell me what your top couple time wasters are or time vampires are. Please don't use names, but give me some ideas of, and this is the test for understanding. I want to see if you guys understand the principle at hand here. Don't be shy.
I would say whilst I'm in a time meeting, getting texts from staff saying, what do I have to do here? I saw this shift has changed or things like that. And then you have to answer them or you feel you have to answer them. I think that's maybe more the key here is you feel you have to answer them because otherwise it just becomes a big, misunderstanding. So right now, for example, I'm in this time meeting and I just got a text, oh, the health department is there. So now everybody's getting all excited, but I have to obviously answer that text now because it's not a big deal. He's just coming for a signature, so things like that, like I know from experience that it's going to become this big thing if I don't say something now. So even though I want to switch my phone off and I want to concentrate and, there's those things that, when you have people who are relying on you or want information from you, it's sort of hard to just put it away and just say, okay, I'm going to just, 100% just sit there and get my stuff done. I think even without staff, right, there's other places that people just coming in and you feel that that's important and maybe devaluing your own time. I don't know. Maybe I said too much.
That's great feedback. Thank you very much. Others?
I would say I definitely fall into the category, hey, you got a minute? And people just pop in and out of my office. And some of those folks, fall into multiple of those categories. And 10 people, 10 minutes, there's an hour out of your day. So I am very cognizant of that. And depending on what the situation is, I've tried to learn over the years to say, hey, can we schedule a meeting for a different time? Can we schedule it for Tuesday at 9 rather than, hey, do you have a minute? But like Natasha was saying, I get those emails and, oh my gosh, this is going on. And if I don't respond fast enough to the email, then I start getting the texts. So I really like the idea of an email etiquette policy.
Yeah, that's something that when I first did that, I'm like, really, do I need to do this? But nobody is managing all these communications that are coming and the rules of the game. And the better you do around that, I mean, communication is vital, right? We will train people on how to communicate, but we won't train them on how to communicate using emails or text. It seems like it's off the grid. And so, but it is today's primary communication path. So it is something that we do want to train on. So good. Anybody else have anything? Well, great. So we are going to talk about how you start to solve some of that. And do you know where your time is going? And, I would say that the majority of us think we know, but we don't really know. We don't necessarily, we may know the elements, but we don't know how much the time is going there. So how many hours, the beginning point is how many hours per day and per week are you currently working? What are the bigger chunks of activities that you are doing on most days? And then how much time do you spend on each of these big chunks? You think you probably should know those better than you do the other thing, but that's a beginning point. And what you do is you start writing down the activities and you actually track a week at a time. And this is something that I've done for years in businesses, and it's just something that's very enlightening. And so you start listing the activities as they start to occur. And in this tool here, you just shade in a half-hour segments as the time goes by. So you start writing them down, you shade them in, and you start to get a snapshot of where your time is going. And it's very revealing to us. And one of the first questions that we ask when we start looking at that data is, what were the top 10 time wasters? What were the things that were wasting your time and you didn't really realize it? How much time did you spend in the zone versus other quadrants and other activities? And what activities should you delegate or possibly outsource? And there's a tool that we have, which is around low interest, low skill items that you look at. And those are candidates to move on from right away. And we have those because in the same way we were talking about the energizing tasks that we have, part of these tasks that are low interest and low skill are demotivating for us. And we shouldn't be doing them. We should, and our time is more valuable than doing those things. So you need to value your time. For business owners and leaders, your time is much more valuable than your salary. It is the missed opportunities to grow revenues and profits while working on the business. So, and that comes back to that definition of leverage. Your time is much more valuable than the money that you make. And, I have these conversations with business owners on a continual basis. They will do things for themselves when they already have people who can do it. And it might come back to perfectionism, But when you say, well, you got that right, but look at what you could have been working on, and you start looking at the alternatives. Any questions? Anything that I can help with on what we covered under this whole area of our self-mastery of time?
I think one of my questions, and I've read Stephen Covey, and I know like the Matrix and all of that stuff, but I think hello. I guess one of my questions was, you know the Matrix, you know what should be urgent, whatever. But I think sometimes in my life, and I don't know if it's anybody else's, but in mine, it's like I don't know how to determine what is most important, because when I look at like, even the small things, I feel like if I miss those, then it becomes a bigger thing. So I sometimes just really never know which quadrant it needs to go into. I mean, some things I know, junk emails or, things like that, that's an obvious, but there's some things that are so small, and I know, like if I leave them for a long time, that, it may not have the highest impact right now, but if I leave it, then it's going to have a high impact later. So sometimes I think, and even just to sit down and evaluate, is this in which quadrant, I don't, and maybe that's also something I can learn, I guess, to get to that time saver, but just to actually, which quadrant does that go into is my question.
Well, it is something that you need to work on in understanding the concept of leverage. And going back to the Pareto Principle, there are some questions that you can ask that help you understand. And there's a technique called, the 5 whys, where you dig deeper into, why is this a time waster? Why do I have to do this now? Why can't somebody else do this? And as you start to ask those questions, you start to reveal the possibilities that you have. So good question, and it's a good point. Now we will talk about that a little bit coming up here, but I'm not sure that we'll fully address that today. Any other questions? Great. So now we're going to talk about planning mastery. And this is now how we move forward. So we've analyzed where time wasters are and what things are valuable and what aren't, but now we have to do something. And so I'm going to come back to the destination mastery, and just put a big caution out there is if you don't know where you're going overall, then everything could be for naught. And then it's just going in the wrong direction. So we need to be able to master our destinations. Do you have a 90-day plan or an annual plan that you use at least weekly to determine major actions needed? Do you have measures that evaluate your progress against that roadmap? Knowing where you want your business to go, it is critical to using your time well. So if you know where your business is going and you're not using your roadmap and you have one, you better start using it. That's the whole purpose of that annual planning or that 90-day planning. Here's what's key, though, is studies show businesses with a plan grow 30% faster than those that don't. You may not even execute the whole plan, but directionally you're moving in the right direction. And it's the same way in running a discipline in a business. If you're running HR, do you have goals for 90 days? Do you have annual goals? And, a business, larger businesses have a pretty involved strategic planning process that establish those priorities and measurements that come back and evaluate progress against them. If you have anything like that, those should be the centerpiece of how you determine what those big rocks are. If the planning process is being done and the big strategic items have been identified, coming back to your question, Natasha, that's one of the ways to identify those things that you should be spending time on. If it's an objective of the business, then it's something that needs to be built in. And we'll talk about how to build those in next. So one of the primary tools that we suggest that everybody has is a weekly default diary. And what's a default diary? Well, this is where we are an international business, and I would call it a weekly default schedule. But we keep the terminology as a diary. And that is what you're going to do this week as a roadmap. So the very first thing to go on this is your priority weekly and monthly tasks as your default. These are the working on the business tasks. So if you don't have your plan in front of you, then these won't be loaded. So it's only the time that's remaining for day-to-day tasks to make it in here. These are only tackled outside of those priority times. And you'll say, well, there's a lot of those things. Well, I want to talk about that in a minute here. So it's a leap in faith to put these major things on your schedule first and say, I'm going to do them. But you're going to see that in reality, it will pay off. So you don't just keep adding to the list here for the next week. You actually keep it focused on those major tasks. And then you do any modifications at the end of the day for the next day. You know, people come in the morning, and that's when they do their planning, and they may not get it done. And so you say, I'm going to end my day with my plan for tomorrow. So yes, may you think about it a little bit tonight? Yeah, you might. But when you come in the next day, you're on your way to work. You know what your plan is. You know what the list is. Big difference. It's a big difference in how productive you are, especially if the second you get into work, you engage that. And then each week, before the week is out, the previous week is out, you construct and modify that schedule. And that default diary makes a difference in what you get done because you're being intentional about it. So you're focused on your goals and what's important, not the urgent. So we're going to talk about a couple planning principles, putting in the big rocks first. So just watching this video, we say that there's so many busy things that we have that we fill the jar with all the little things and try to get them out of the way. And then we'll get to the big things. And guess what happens? They don't all fit, right? You can't get them all in the jar. However, by putting in first the big rocks, the important things, the amazing thing is if you can make that leap of faith and start doing that and stick to that, you will see leverage start to kick in and you will fit everything in the jar of time. It's a true principle from time management. It's a true principle, physical principle here. So, you know, does it make sense for how you do it and how you do your planning? Yeah, it really does. So here's some questions that may help. You know, and if it's one of those big rocks, does it generate new customers, new clients? Does it retain existing customer clients effectively? Does it meet a requirement for compliance that we need to meet? Does it help you in some genuinely tangible profit increasing way? Can you see it? If the answer is not yes, and you can have your own list, but come up with a way to develop your list of filtering if things are your big rocks. If the answer is not yes, then they're probably not your rocks. So another planning principle, and it all goes into building this default diary. As Mark Twain once said, if it's your job to eat a frog, it's best to do it first thing in the morning And if it's your job to eat 2 frogs, it's best to eat the biggest one first. So that quote became a book by Brian Tracy called Eat the Frog. And we really subscribe to this. And, your frog is your most important task. And if you have 2 frogs, you eat the ugliest one first, the one that's the nastiest, hardest to do, you do it first. And if you must eat a frog, don't procrastinate, because it's not going to taste better late in the day. And it's not going to be gone the next day. This is something that I've personally had to learn on how to get those things that I don't want to do that are important out of the way. But I will tell you that the key to reaching high levels of performance and productivity is developing this lifelong habit of taking those frogs and working on them first. So now we're to the point of that weekly planning calendar. And this is just an example of one that we use in our coaching business. And we're laying into this the different elements that first, that are really critical for growth and development and are important but not urgent. Nothing spectacular, but we also lay in times for some of the other activities. So let's just take a minute, and this is just a starting point, but what would your default diary include? Just think about maybe 2 or 3 things that would go on your default diary. What are your highest value activities? I mean, that you're really contributing in the business when you're doing those things. Right now, what is the most valuable use of your time? And that should be in reference to where you're trying to go. So what are the potential consequences of doing or not doing the task? And just resist the temptation to clear up small things first. So just take a leap of faith and say, if you had an ideal world and we're on the point of power that is empowering and that we're going to take control of, and we are going to not give up and start blaming and making excuses. If we're on that side, what are the things that go on the list? Just write down 3 things that would be the most important things that you do. All right. Has everybody been able to identify one that's not urgent but important on their list? Let's focus on being, even idealistic if we need to be, and saying that would be really important if I did that, and it would help not only now, but it would help in the future. Project that you're not getting to that would save significant time. So anybody have an example of at least one?
The one that is most prevalent to me right now is we're working on switching our payroll and HRIS system. And so, that project is a large undertaking that there's several of us involved. So kind of breaking that down into smaller chunks for the week so that it's more manageable, because at the end of the day, the value that that's going to create is a huge time savings for the payroll person, the CFO, and myself. So, kind of making sure that we're handling those little pieces on our timetable so that we get to where we need to be in October when the deadline is, or the rollout date.
Well, that's a great example. And now it is a corporate priority, so it makes it on to the schedule. You have to build it in. And if you don't build it in, you're going to get behind, and you can't be behind. So great. Anybody else have an example? So you have to ask yourself, if you don't have an example of what those most important things are, of why that is. And then that means you need to be able to reflect some on how you get the most contribution, because again, trying to stay on the side of you control your destiny. You have impact on the contribution you make. And if you are totally an inline person who is just fielding what comes at you, that's understandable. But if you're a manager or a leader, you're expected to manage and lead. If you're an owner, there's nobody else to turn to. Great. All right. So now we're just going to run through to wrap up, a laundry list of time management tips that we have talked about today or have alluded to in some way. Very first, set motivating goals for your business or your department. If you don't have these, then you are not going to use your time effectively. Create a default calendar driven by your 90-day goals. What are you looking to achieve in the next 90 days? Make sure you put those large rocks in the default diary first. It's a leap of faith, it seems like, but it's proven technique. Eat the frog for breakfast every day. If you can, make sure you get started on it before you even pull out the laundry list of things. Don't major in minor things. Use that Pareto Principle. It is real. It is a key to leverage. It is true that 20% of the things you could be working on will give you 80% of the effectiveness that you need. Tame phone, email, and other interruptions. And if you're a line, when I'm saying a line person, is you're in the flow of work where you're going to be receiving these things. There are elements that can be done to minimize them being full interruptions and still servicing customers and needs as you go. And obviously identify and eliminate the stuff you shouldn't be doing. We probably are doing things we don't need to be doing. If we aren't, then we're highly effective. And I think it's something that we need to realize, that there's real things that will come out on our time study that will leave us with areas where we can eliminate some work. Just require agendas for all meetings and use conference calls to save time. That we've learned a lot in the last year around use of conference calls and the effectiveness. Now, I am a person who wants to do in-person meetings on important discussions, but conference calls are great. We've done them all over the world, and they can be very effective, and you can have very good relationships through them. But you do need agendas. People need to be trained on putting together a proper agenda, so that when you're bringing all these resources together, you're getting good use of time. And then in your role, learn to delegate to your team. If you're in a leadership position or an ownership position, there are plenty of opportunities to delegate. You can't let that perfectionism get in your way, or not understanding what your role is in that delegation process. People think that they just need to quickly tell somebody and the person should fully get it. No, that's not the case. There's more in your responsibility where you take ownership to make them successful that you need to take on. And then, you need to have someone to hold you accountable for your plan. You really need to do that. If you run a department, obviously you got a manager or somebody who's probably over you. If you're a business owner, you don't. But you need to have accountability, because if you come back 6 months from now, you may have made very little ground if you haven't used your time well. So here's your homework. Complete a time study of your work. I've got forms, I can get them to you. And then look at it and say, what are the 3 things to stop doing? What are 3 things to start doing? And what are your current large rocks and frogs? Even if you don't do your time study, starting to ask these things of yourself are really important for your overall effectiveness and time usage. Further questions? So we've talked about self-mastery and then planning mastery. And we've alluded to destination mastery. Any questions I can help you before we wrap up? We've got a couple more slides and that'll be it.
I've just got a comment, I guess. I think for me, one of the things that I guess my nugget from here was have someone hold me accountable. As an owner, it's really hard because you can just say what you want to do and everybody has to say, you know, but I think this having someone hold me accountable is would be the thing for me that I'm taking away. So thank you.
Great, great. Anybody else have a BFO that they can share? Any other questions? Okay, well, I would really appreciate any feedback that you can give me right now. So if you have your phone and it's an iPhone or you have a QR reader, if you just scan the screen, you'll go into a 2-minute survey, and I'd ask that you do that for me right now. Getting feedback and using a continuous improvement process is so important. So I thank you for that.
And Chuck, I do want to mention, I just placed the link for everybody in the chat box. So if you do not have the capability to scan the QR code, that option is also available.
Yep, you just have to put that into your browser and it'll pull it up. If anybody's having any struggle with that, just let me know. We'll give it a couple minutes here. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the last slide. And I just want to thank you for taking the time today. And it is really a first step for anybody who is trying to get a handle on the use of their time. It is a battle. It is something that you can go below the point of power and give up on. But I will tell you, your mastery of time is critical for your business or your career success. And the better that you do at mastering your time usage and realizing that you really do control it more than you think is so important. So I'll leave up on the screen my contact information. If you want, I have forms that I can email to you for both the log, your daily diary, and also your time study. And would be, because we did the seminar, willing to talk to you about that if you decide to go through and do a time study for yourself. And my my background is actually as an industrial engineer, where I've done countless amounts of studies like this to find out what brings value and what doesn't bring value. So it's an area of expertise for me. So any final questions? And again, here's my contact information. You can grab it here, or I'm sure you can get it through the chamber. So I'd like to thank the Worcester Chamber for allowing us to do this and providing that value. It really is very valuable what they do to try to help make us as business participants in the community more successful. So thank you, Katie. Please pass that on.
Absolutely. And Chuck, thank you for your time today. I know personally I learned a lot, and I'm going to go back through your presentation just to try to hold myself a bit more accountable with my time management personally. So I greatly appreciate that. And thank you all for joining us. I know we had some people private messaging me having to step out. One of our doctors had to go perform surgery and others had some meetings scheduled right at 11. So I will send you all a link once the recorded session is up on our website. Our website will have the presentation. Chuck, if you don't mind, I can also host those sheets for the time study sheet and the daily diary on our website, if that's okay with you.
Yep.
Perfect. And then we do have an upcoming session on Tuesday, March 30th on how your website treats visitors. That'll be with Jen Klein of Line of Hope Solutions. So hopefully you all can join us for that. If in the future anybody has any suggestions for topics, don't hesitate to connect with me. And if there are no further questions, I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.